Police department, anybody inside? Answer up, do it now.
Like many cities in the US, Kansas City has two stories to tell.
We want the same chance. We want the same opportunities for a job.
There's the story about the gleaming, pretty neighborhoods.
When you talk to people in Kansas City, you hear a lot about the truth divide.
A land of opportunity that's mostly white. And then there's the story about the east side of town, home to the black community.
Well, there's not a whole lot of people living around here, so many empty houses.
The disinvestment, the poverty, the violence.
Dove in on my floor, anticipating that the glass was going to start breaking in the house or something.
Shootings and homicides, young black men killing each other.
They're doing it all day in the penitentiary, or they in the dirt, dead.
This is the real story of Kansas City. It's the story of modern America. Its biggest story, its biggest shame.
You do not come on this property to steal, to break in.
In this film, you'll see what it's like to live on the east side of town, how brave people here are fighting back, how the police are trying something new to build bridges with the community, and how City Hall is taking on its critics.
139.
Everybody says action. Nobody has an answer. If anybody had an answer to that question, you don't think it would already be being used?
One Monday in June, and a community gathers to mourn another murder victim. 3-year-old Amorian S.L. Hale was asleep in his bed when the bullet struck his house.
Well, another baby was murdered. 3 years old, Amarian. And, you know, it was another senseless shooting.
This is a community ravaged by violence. In 2015, as the city's murder rate soared once again, nearly 3/4 of the homicide victims were black. The 7 children murdered, 6 were black.
If you look at the 50s and 60s, 70s, the black community, you know, people keep talking about it takes a village. We were a village then. Now, it's two things going on. Either you don't have anybody that live next door to you, or you don't know who they are.
This is something you'll find across America, a segregated black community. In Kansas City, the area was carved out decades ago by the racist policies of the real estate industry, the school district, and the Federal Housing Administration. Troost Avenue marks the boundary, and the blue dots show where the black community lives. According to KCPD, 3/4 of Kansas City's violent crimes occur in one area. In 2010, the Carter family chose to move to the east side of town. They knew the community here was fractured, and they wanted to help rebuild it. Then on a winter's evening, 4 years later, a gun battle broke out round the corner.
All of a sudden, I started hearing gunshots, a bunch of them, really, really close. So it was coming from this direction. I just basically threw the door open and ended up kind of baseball sliding into the floor.
A short time afterwards, Donald's wife, Kristen, arrived home and went upstairs to check on their 2 children, Lainey and Miles.
So I come inside, and I somehow ended up looking up, and there is a massive bullet hole in the wall.
The bullet had passed into the house. Lainey's bedroom was just a few feet away from its entry point.
I can remember walking into the room to check on Lainey, and you can't see her until you walk around. It was a bit unnerving, not knowing if she was okay or not.
The bullet had lodged in an air vent in the ceiling. The Carters have grown used to the violence in their area of the city.
Not a bullet coming through your house, but drive-by shootings, murders, drugs, domestic disputes on the lawn, people cussing at their little 3-year-old babies about things. This is our normal. It is. This is our normal.
This is their normal. In 2014, according to police data, there were nearly 90 violent crimes within a 3-block radius of their home. That's homicide, rape, robbery, and assaults. But the Carters aren't prepared to move out and abandon their neighbors.
What do the people do who can't leave, okay? What do the people do who can't just get up and try to go somewhere else and do something else? How do they get to live in a community?
The gun battle was fought here, round the corner from their house. those involved haven't been caught. On the ground, officers found bullet casings for 7.62 caliber rounds. That's larger than the standard size issued to United States soldiers. Determined to tackle the violent crime in Kansas City are the 1,300 or so officers of KCPD.
Our day squad, they were watching one of our targets, and they got into a car chase, then they bailed, got in a foot chase.
The man they were chasing has run into this house past the terrified owner.
We've got some SWAT guys inside searching the house now.
He could be armed and dangerous. SWAT find him hiding in the basement, and an arrest is made before anyone is hurt. You may think this was a successful outcome for KCPD, and of course, to an extent, it was. But there's a new approach in town. This police unit is determined to make fewer arrests. From its start in 2012, it was headed up by Major Joe McHale.
If I go out and arrest somebody at 17 for a felony, what does that do to them for the rest of their life? They can't get a job. It's a self-perpetuating cycle. So as a police department, you kind of build your own problem.
It's moved on from the zero-tolerance approach parts of the black community saw in the 1990s.
We flooded that area with police resources. Did it build community trust? Did it break the cycle of violence for the people in the community? No.
This is the headquarters of Kansas City's No Violence Alliance, or KC Nova. Joe's team has been given office space by the Jackson County prosecutors. The alliance includes other law enforcement agencies, academics, and City Hall. KC Nova doesn't just want to react to the violence, it wants to get in front of it.
It's different in that we're trying to prevent violent crime before it occurs, but in a focused deterrence model, that's the goal.
That's right. They want to stop the crime from happening in the first place. In other words, they want to keep young men such as Jerome away from the violence.
So I got put in a foul, and that's why I'm sitting here today, you know, trying to get my life on a better path for real.
Jerome used to be a member of a gang called the 51st Street Crips. It was a life with only short-term prospects.
At any second, somebody can slide through and start shooting at you, you get killed, or you can get picked up and get sentenced to life in prison or something. That's life on the edge right there. You're living for the moment.
Research shows that those in these gangs are more likely to be killed than the US soldiers deployed to the wars in Iraq or Afghanistan. In order for the Alliance to understand these groups, it needs to know who knows whom. The names and contacts of around 1,000 people were shared by the police with academics at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, who turn the data into sociograms. Police resources can then be directed at those with the most contacts.
Have you heard of the NOVA program yet? Have a good day.
The message delivered is that we're watching you in your group, and you should tell the others that we're going to come after the next group that kills someone.
One way or another, we're going to stop the violence, whether they choose to do it or whether it's put in our hands.
But the message isn't just a threat of arrest. The men are also offered the help of client advocates, and they're given an invitation to a call-in.
This card here is actually his invitation. It's letting him know that Nova would really like to talk to him and explain to him what we have to offer him.
The call-ins take place every 3 months. They provide the Alliance with a chance to talk to the young men directly. These are the names on Joe's sociograms. They hear from the mayor, law enforcement, and the community. A stark warning is delivered.
In jail you don't want to do me no good because I can't help it either. A 3-year-old baby was killed the other day. 3 years old. What are we coming to here in Kansas City?
But a helping hand is also offered.
It's a process to get away from it. If you want help, we're going to give it to you.
KC Nova recognizes that an effective way to deter crime is to equip these young men with the skills they need to get a regular job. For Jerome, the offer of help is not something he's used to.
I do really feel like this is the first time I'm getting offered help because, you know, I'm staying away from the streets. They give me the resources that I need in a positive manner.
His childhood east of Troost wasn't an easy one.
it was rough. And it's like basically survival of the fittest for real. And it just continued on.
His father was in prison and his mother had to work full time. He couldn't resist the streets.
I first seen somebody get robbed probably when I was like 14 years old. And I was scared, but at the same time, I was curious.
At the age of 17, Jerome was given a 7-year sentence for robbery.
I don't blame nobody but myself for the path that I went down. I chose to go down that path. I said, yeah, come on, let's go.
Jerome has turned his back on the violence and crime, and he's building a new life with the help of Andre, a client advocate. Some of Andre's clients have shared with him why they turned to crime in the first place, and he questions how much free will was involved.
For some of our clients, the lifestyle that they lead isn't necessarily a choice. Their world isn't as broad as what you or I may see.
Police department, anybody's in there, answer up.
Jerome believes there's a separate city within our city, one with its own government and courts.
We handled it how we handled it. The streets got its own government. The city got, courts, municipal courts, state courts. That's what the streets got. Their own courts.
Andre and the other 3 client advocates are working with around 200 individuals to whom they're offering services such as literacy classes and job training. If the initiative succeeds, it can create taxpayers who are no longer stretching police resources. And more importantly, it can save lives and help keep the streets safe for families such as Donald Carter's.
Right now we're gonna go see one of the best people on the block, Mr. Hill, that really kind of took a role in our life. How are you, sir? Almost like a father figure.
Donald and Kristen have become good friends with William J. Hill, or Mr. Hill, who lives a few houses down from them. Mr. Hill moved here as a boy with his family during the 1950s, when the area was more of a village.
It was, hello, Mr. Kearns, hello, Mr. White. It was Mr., Mrs., how y'all doing? Anything I can do for you? That's the way it was. That's the way I am, still.
Over the decades, he's seen it decline.
But now, all of the good people are gone. All of the community structure is gone. It's ridiculous.
Across the road, there's a house that's causing trouble.
Start seeing the cars coming and going, 2 and 3, 4 o'clock in the morning.
So what's going on over there?
They're selling drugs.
An elderly woman owns the property, and it's her son who's in his 60s and his friends who are involved in the drug trade. Mr. Hill keeps a close eye on them, and he believes they watch him back. He's let them know that he owns guns.
I walked out the door with a couple of pieces of hardware, that I've tried to cover up with a sheet. But you can almost imagine what it is, they're really long. I'm more or less telling them, you do not come on this property to steal, to break in.
For him, the house has been a nuisance for years, and he's frustrated that the police haven't done more.
I used to call the police a lot, but they used to always come late.
Donald's long-term strategy is just to wait it out.
My biggest thing is that younger guys come in and try to set up shop. Thank you, sir, for your time.
Donald and Mr. Hill know they back each other up.
I think that if it came down to it, he would do whatever for my family. Bye, babe. That's really what this is about. This is about us being here for each other.
The Oak Park neighborhood, where Donald lives, is home to around 10,000 people, the vast majority of whom just want to pay their taxes and get on with their lives. Most of their local representatives sit in City Hall, but they have at least one who lives in their community and has an office here. After winning the vote at the end of 2013, Pat Clark represents the area as president of its neighborhood association.
See, this Oak Park Neighborhood Association, man, has been around for years, but neglect, I really can't even say we can even use that word anymore.
The challenges Pat faces are huge. This area has some of the city's most violent crime hotspots, and over the years, he's been to many funerals.
And as long as I'm here, I'm gonna go to many more. 9 times out of 10, I know the family. This stuff is personal for me.
With a team of 2 part-time staff, Pat is trying steadily to build up a network of contacts on the blocks, but he's yet to get to Donald's.
Come on, man, let's get out, man. Let me.
For over 3 decades now, Pat has been working with the youngsters here. He wants to provide them with a male role model that he believes too many of them don't have at home.
If you got a man that wants to be a man and raise his kids respectfully, you don't have kids doing ride-bys. You don't have kids walking around with their pants around their ankles. You don't have kids cursing and being disrespectful. Beat me, I start calling you that. Ball game.
In this part of town, around 60% of the families are made up of a single female with children.
If you build relationships with these kids, man, you can get anything you want.
Politicians on both sides of the political divide have acknowledged that the state has played a role in breaking up black families. Historically, this was done by over 200 years of slavery. In recent times, it's been imprisonment. Over the last 3 decades, it's estimated the incarceration rate for black males in Missouri prisons has almost doubled.
Oh, that's off.
And it's now nearly 5 times the rate of that for white males. Pat and Casey Nova are pushing together to try and keep the young men away from violence. If they can strengthen the communities, neighborhood associations have a critical role to play. One that's having great success is the Ivanhoe neighborhood that sits just to the west of Pat's Oak Park. Oak Park knows it could learn a lot from Ivanhoe, and today, Pat's deputy, Forrest Tyson, is meeting with Ivanhoe's Margaret May.
You can't improve your neighborhood if you don't have a standard.
We need a lot of work. Oak Park is suffering. I reached out to Miss May just to ask for her assistance to right the ship.
Do you have a copy of our Block Contact Handbook? Did I give you one of those? Okay, let me get that and give it to you.
The work in Ivanhoe started decades ago. This is a neighborhood that has steadily been rebuilding itself. It has its own community center and a full-time staff of 4 and 2 part-time. It runs classes for its children and it's built playgrounds. An empty lot is now a demonstration garden where people can learn how to grow fresh, healthy food. And Ivanhoe's purchased land for development. With financial support from City Hall and the Missouri Housing Development Commission, this neighborhood association is going to build quality, affordable housing.
As these people come and show this is a good place to live, we're certain that more will follow.
The momentum in Ivanhoe seems to be building. It was started and helped along by 2 factors: the bravery of this couple and the generosity of this man. Mortgage banker James B. Nutter has put over $1 million of his own money into the Ivanhoe neighborhood.
With Mr. Nutter's assistance, we were able to renovate this building. He's our go-to guy. He's come to our rescue over and over again. An incredible story.
I frankly felt like I owe my city something. And the more I got into it, the happier I was. The African-American people had lost their confidence in themselves, in my opinion, through no fault of their own. And Ivanhoe is a good pick-me-up.
It was Mr. Nutter who lent Ivanhoe the money to cover the construction costs of its housing project.
He always comes to our rescue and helps with things that require dollars, and he's always talking us up.
Back in 1997, Mr. Nutter saw an article in the Kansas City Star about the young family and their attempts to address the problems on their block. Inspired by their heroism, he told them he'd like to help in any way he could. Much like the Carters in Oak Park to the east, this is the story of a family who refused to back down.
I'm not unlike any parent. One of the greatest joys is to have all your children together. We're very, very proud. The fact that they weathered the storm of living in a neighborhood like ours.
Alan and Yolanda were not from east of Troost. In 1987, as a growing family, they decided to move into a house here that Alan would flip. They had no idea what their new block was really like.
One day I was sitting in the living room watching my favorite show, Cops. I kept getting distracted because of all of the people that were arguing and fighting with the police outside. So it was sobering. It was like,
a harsh reality.
This is where we live. It's worse than cops.
As with the Carters, the Youngs decided they wouldn't move out and abandon their neighbors. Discreetly, they started to organize block meetings to discuss how to tackle the crime, but the drug dealers found out.
There was a carload of guys parked. They yelled out, they said, "We're gonna kill you and all your family." That was a frightening moment where, you have to decide that God is more for you than the whole world against you.
There were several incidents like that, I
There's
think.
several
Threats on our lives just because we were trying to make our neighborhood better.
They refused to give up. This was a community they felt had been abandoned by the authorities.
The philosophy was contain the drugs and the crime and the blight in one area. Okay, keep it in that area so it doesn't migrate into the nicer parts of town.
The Youngs would call the police and they wouldn't come. Alan knew that he needed their help to defeat the gangs, and so in the late 1990s, he met with a senior officer at the local patrol station.
He said, "We don't know who our friends are in that neighborhood." And at that point, I said, "Well, now you know me, and I am your friend. We need you to help us make our neighborhood better."
At his prompting, the police started to help them to shut down the drug houses. The streetlights were fixed, and the Youngs and their neighbors started to clean up the area. It's a time their children still remember.
My parents really were pioneers in this area with getting things started. Neighborhood cleanups each weekend isn't the norm for the average family.
It's changed drastically. I mean, when we were younger, I think my parents even had fears of us just going out to the front yard.
Drug houses are gone. It's nice to not have to worry about stray bullets.
Hello, hello.
On this day in June 2015, the Ivanhoe community gathers for food and friendship.
I'm fine, thank you.
Entrepreneurs have set up their stalls.
I'm just thinking, I don't have.
It's a celebration for the restoration of their park.
Look at all the children.
But they're also marking Father's Day and Juneteenth and the ending of slavery. And as part of this community, Officer Nathan Hurley is lending a hand.
I act as a liaison between the Kansas City, Missouri Police Department and the Ivanhoe neighborhood.
Nathan is one of 6 community liaison officers. They operate outside of KC Nova, and their purpose is to build bridges with the community here.
Interacting with the kids, playing with the kids is a huge part. A lot of times, kids will grow up with a negative view of the police.
He's forming relationships that could prove critical in the event of a controversial police shooting.
If there is an incident that occurs, we can have a conversation about it and talk about why things happened and what happened.
Ivanhoe recognizes the importance of his role. They've given him an office in their building, and because they've got contacts on 90 of their 160 blocks, he has an intelligence network he can plug into. But by spending time working with the community and not just responding to 911 calls, Nathan has found that his own perceptions of the people here have changed.
Previously, I would answer 911 calls, and I'm seeing people on their worst days. But working here in Ivanhoe, I've been able to see them on their best days and interact with them in a positive light, and that's really changed the way that I look at things.
There's an argument that all police officers should share this more rounded view of the people they serve. Donald Carter has a unique perspective on policing. He not only lives in Oak Park, he grew up here. And before he took a job in the finance industry, he served as an officer with KCPD for 8 years, until the fall of 2014, and he's still in the reserves. Donald's view is that because he's from the area, he's better able to police it.
I think it gave me a little bit of an edge on being able to communicate.
In his opinion, there's too little emphasis during police training on how to build personal relationships with the people they'll serve.
Because of the way that we're trained, well, we have to think in a certain way that we tend to objectify everybody. And so we're objectifying human beings instead of recognizing them as human beings.
At Police Academy, KCPD recruits spend 150 hours on defense tactics, 120 hours on firearms training, and 4 hours on minority relations. Donald believes officers would have a better understanding if they lived in, or at least nearer to, the communities they serve.
It wouldn't be that every person that's walking down the street is a potential suspect of some crime. And I think the people would have a different perspective of them. Because right now, they generally are seen as outsiders coming in, and the reality is that, well, for the most part, they are.
But he doesn't think that black communities should only be policed by black officers.
I definitely think that a white officer could police this community and police it well. I've actually seen it, where there are officers who are from somewhere else that take a vested interest in the people that they serve, and really it's the ones that have served in the same areas for a longer period of time.
KC Nova's alliance, which includes the police department, is determined to show that it serves and protects everyone in Kansas City. So on this day in spring 2015, it's taking a further step into the communities east of Troost.
It's so wonderful to have a relationship with each other before we're in a crisis.
It's the launch of an initiative called the Burn Grant Area Project, which will be funded by the Federal Department of Justice for 3 years. The idea is to assemble a range of organizations that will work with 7 of the neighborhoods here, including Oak Park and Ivanhoe. This isn't about handouts. It's about enabling this fractured community to mend itself so that the violence can come to an end.
What we're trying to achieve is showing the community that we have a plan, that we care, and we're tired of the violence in Kansas City, Missouri, in the entire metro area.
The 2.15 square mile area was chosen because it contains some of Kansas City's most violent crime hotspots. Despite the efforts of the associations, some of these run across Ivanhoe and Oak Park. Donald's block is between them. Sergeant Garrick Haynes was appointed to head a police team of 4 hand-picked officers. They want to work with the community leaders to make the area safer.
So it's a hotspot area in the city, but it's not just like homicides. It's violent crimes, assaults, aggravated assaults, shootings where people still live.
With support from community non-profits, Garrick's team starts to meet with the neighborhood leaders. Michael Manser from the Jackson County Prosecutor's Office chairs these meetings.
We see around the country that the major institutions of every city, like police, like prosecutors, like the mayor's office, they have this challenge now of connecting better with the community.
During 2015, the killing of black men by police officers around the country continued to dominate the headlines. In this context, it's all the more important for Garrick to demonstrate that KCPD is on the side of this community.
I've got a lot of people at my disposal. I've got vice units, I've got drug units, I've got traffic units.
But the community leaders don't tell him who to arrest. They ask for help with the blight.
We have a lot of vacant lots and vacant houses, you know. They need a lot of attention.
In the black community, the blight is everywhere.
The single most challenging thing in Ivanhoe right now, the vacancy rate. Either a vacant lot or vacant house.
The vacancy rate for houses in this area of the city is around 30%. And there are empty lots, overgrown and cracked sidewalks, weeds and trash.
If I see trash in my neighborhood, I'm going to pick it up. Another great liquor bottle.
The Carters can't tackle the violent crime head on, but they're trying to restore some pride to the area by keeping it clean.
If I see somebody throw trash in my neighborhood, I'm going to talk to them about it.
Round the corner from their house, near to where the gun battle was fought, the illegal dumping is getting worse. There's too much for the Carters to clear up by themselves, so Donald tries City Hall's 311 number. It's a service we pay for as taxpayers that's supposed to remove illegal dumping.
It's blocking the sidewalk down here, and then some of it's in the street.
City Hall told this program that once it's notified of illegal dumping, it'll usually remove it within 2 to 4 working days. Donald discovers, however, that it can sometimes take a lot longer.
Someone actually called that in, that he was notifying management to let them know.
Okay.
One moment for me.
How long ago was that called in?
Let's see.
Donald's making this call at the start of July 2015.
Yeah, this has been since March.
It would seem that somebody else called about the same trash 5 months ago, and it's still here.
But this was called in March too?
Right, this has
He's told to wait at least 5 business days before the city will remove it because of recent storm damage that it's yet to clear up.
Well, I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
But the city won't do anything about the condition of the properties. This is what blight looks like. You'll find houses like this throughout the black community. Pat Clark knows all about it.
What I'm getting ready to show you now is the way it looks. This is what it looks like around here. It don't do much for hope. You know what I'm saying? I mean, look at it.
These houses are down the road from the Carters. City Hall is well aware of the issue. At the launch of the Burn Grant project, City Manager Troy Schulte had this to say.
Thank you very much. Keep up your great work and keep moving this city forward.
Well, we've got a number of issues in the urban core that we as a city have to tackle. The first and foremost issue is the large number of vacant and abandoned structures. And that is a huge detriment to the vitality of our neighborhoods.
Garrick and his team have been asked by the community leaders to help with the blight. His officers have been specially trained to assess how urban environments can foster crime.
Some of the boards on the house have been pulled back or removed in order for people to get inside the house, either to sleep, to further commit crimes from narcotic use, prostitution, things like that. We've got a lot of concealment for anybody that's up to no good. There's a strong link between criminal activity and these vacant houses.
The board over this property's doorway has been pulled off completely.
Copy. We're holding the air.
There's obvious signs of squatters that have been staying inside this house.
The house is right beside homes with young children.
Person will be.
The police team also starts to investigate the blight around the 5 violent crime hotspots. They discover 19 empty properties with open access, including these 2 houses near to the hotspot at 27th and Prospect.
We're going to go and clear these abandoned houses, make sure nobody's inside.
Police department, anybody inside? Answer up, do it now!
They've no idea what they could encounter. It's worth noting that the Burn Grant project takes its name from the New York police officer Edward Byrne, who was murdered in 1988 while protecting a witness. According to FBI data, over 14,500 US police officers were injured after being assaulted in the line of duty during 2013. The house is empty, but there are clear signs of what it's being used for. Down the street, an arrest is made.
Well, he came out of one of our abandoned properties. He's not supposed to be in there, and then he's just got warrants. So he's going to go to jail for those warrants today.
The man was in this house. Yes, there is a house there. The visible police presence on the block today is winning them some fans.
The neighbors can exhale, say, hey, we've got some protection here. It's not as crazy today as it was yesterday.
What do you think about the police operation here today? What's your view on that?
Oh, I think it's real good. They need to let people know aware about what's going on around here. You know, a lot of people, well, it's not a whole lot of people live around here. So many empty houses.
But the police will depart and the criminals could return. Garrick hopes to send out a message.
One of the things that everybody understands is that the streets talk. They know what's going on. The word will get out. The abandoned property is not the place you want to be.
There are so many empty houses and vacant lots, it's estimated around 8,500 in the urban core, that the criminals can just move on to the next one. In Ivanhoe, the numbers are overwhelming.
There's so many of the abandoned properties down here that it's hard to keep tabs on them all. There's nobody actively responsible for them, so folks will go in there and use drugs, commit crimes.
JCPD, anybody inside? Answer up!
Shouldn't the owners be held responsible and have to keep the weeds down and the doors boarded up? In fact, all of these particular houses have just one owner. Who owns them? City Hall. Donald Carter is trying to clear up his neighborhood, and he's called City Hall's 311 service about some illegal dumping. They told him they'd need at least 5 business days to remove it. But just over 3 weeks later, And there's even more. A week after this, and Donald goes to check on it.
This is new trash that's here, so I don't know if somebody else like dumped here or if this was actually an effort to clean it up.
For 311 call center for all city services, press 3.
So we're on hold for a second.
It's outside 2 empty properties owned by City Hall. Some of it's been bagged, but there's plenty that hasn't been touched.
Your call is important. Please wait for the next available operator.
Well, it's a start. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
All right, thank you.
Have a good day.
You too.
He's told that they'll let the relevant department know about it.
So yeah, it's just good that something was done. So I guess we have to stay on it in order for stuff to keep being done, or just do it ourselves.
2 days later, and he's back with Kristen.
Oh no, this is absolutely sad. It even has the Kansas City logo on it.
Oh yeah.
Maybe they ran out of room.
Ran out of room? I want to be understanding of the system and how it works, but the bottom line is that it really shows how little of a priority that our neighborhood or neighborhoods like it really are.
The Carters have had enough, and they call on a friend to help them remove the trash.
We called the city on...
Waste of time.
I mean, it took them about a month to actually get cleaning up of the stuff, but then they ended up leaving their own trash.
For Mr. Hill, it's especially galling. Earlier in the year, he'd been taken to court by the city because he hadn't carried out repairs to the exterior of his house. Now he's clearing up City Hall property that's in a worse state.
I'm looking at a house now that belongs to the city where the eaves are rotten. There's no gutters where there's supposed to be gutters. It's not fair, no shape or form, that the city can let their property go below what my property looked like. That's not fair.
In 2014, City Hall issued fines of $660,000 for housing tickets and citations. And yet this property is owned by City Hall. And this one, and this one, and this one.
The city can't control when people abandon houses, but if they take them over for whatever reason...
Then they're responsible to
Yeah, then they're responsible to maintain it.
Back in 2012, as the recession continued to bite and foreclosures rocketed, statute enabled City Hall to create a land bank to take on the tax-delinquent properties that can't be sold on the courtroom steps. These are the places that nobody wants.
No bids, next parcel.
Typically, the taxes haven't been paid on them for at least 4 years, and they may have sat empty for much longer. The dates on the boards give an indication.
So yeah, this board was put on here at least in 2009.
July 23rd of 2008. June 6th of 2008.
On this map, the City Hall properties are marked in green. You can see the dividing line. Just east of Troost is the Paseo, and east of the Paseo is Foreclosure Town. It's estimated this accounts for around 50% of the blight here.
Who wants to live in this mess? Who wants to live next to a house that looks like these do? I mean, these look like they're from a scary children's story.
In the last 3 years, City Hall has cut the land bank's budget by nearly 15%. This means the weeds can only be trimmed 5 times a year. The second floor windows are open to the elements, and there's not the money to keep up with demolitions. For the mayor, however, the land bank's budget is just one of many he has to balance out.
It's not nearly as simplistic as to simply say you're not doing enough, because the bottom line is that we don't have enough to do everything that we'd like.
The other half of the blight is owned privately, but it's City Hall through its property code inspectors that's supposed to ensure they're maintained properly. These 3 properties that Pat Clark's been complaining about are a mile or so south of the Carters. There are nearly 100 violation notices on them. Many are still open. Will things improve over the summer? Not really. When houses like this are owned by companies, it's not always easy for the inspectors to find the person responsible. City Hall wants a new law to help with this.
Until we are able to get some additional legislation that allows us to track down the real owners and hold them accountable, then we do the best we can.
Meanwhile, it's the neighbors who suffer.
They don't keep the grass and stuff cut. And then when you find an empty house like that, empty place, people use that for a dump. They dump their trash, their garbage, everything.
William and his friends try to pick up the trash, and he cuts the grass at the empty house opposite. He's called City Hall more than once to complain.
Houses are falling down, they need to be torn down. And the area needs to be cleaned up.
City Hall's 40 code inspectors have a caseload of nearly 14,000 properties. So at the moment, it may be easier to chase people such as Mr. Hill than to hold absent owners to account. The blight makes the blocks more dangerous. It attracts trash, and there are other consequences for residents.
Property values go down whenever properties are in this condition.
He's right. The blight depresses the housing market and compounds the segregation of poverty. Families won't move in. Or will they?
As I drive from my home over to Ivanhoe, you can really see a true transition. It seems to really go south, if you will, as you cross that truce divide.
David Larrabee has become an expert in the real estate market here.
Someone's future home.
David made his fortune in the finance industry, and he believes that markets can be a force for good.
I call it compassionate capitalism. My wife and I wanted to have a goal when I was still young enough. I could take capital, I've been very blessed, and be able to try to give back.
His aim is to entice families of whatever race to lay down roots east of Troost and bring some stability back to the community. He bought this property in Oak Park from a private owner at the end of 2013.
This is one, there were dead animals in this house when we first bought it. Lots of drug paraphernalia.
David paid $13,000 for it and then spent $50,000 on doing it up. Today, it's on the market for $65,000.
Mortgage payment, taxes, insurance, all in, comes to around $412, which is much cheaper than what people are paying for rent.
But no one will buy it, and it's sat empty for 6 months. The blight in the area is not helping the market.
The boarded up houses really make it difficult.
There are 5 empty properties on the block. 3 of them are owned by City Hall. Undeterred, David tried again, further west this time, in the Ivanhoe neighborhood. Rather than have the empty houses on the block frustrate his efforts, he simply bought them all.
This is our beachhead, if you will. We're just going to take it one house at a time, frankly.
But other challenges remained.
A lot of title insurance companies are nervous about working with properties that come from the land bank.
All land bank properties are for sale, but, unhelpfully, they come with questionable title. David's attorney had to sort this out for a property he purchased. But for one of his finished houses, success.
We have a buyer who was close to the asking price, which we love because we're trying to set a market here.
Through a non-profit, he'd found a young couple prepared to cross the Truce Divide.
Yeah, so for a while I was really even scared just to come visit the houses because there were so many stereotypes of like this side of the city. I don't know, in my mind, like people were like standing on the streets with guns. Like I'd never been over here. I just felt so much peace when I did finally come over here.
For David, it had been a slog, 12 months from start to finish. He thought he'd taken one small step towards rebuilding the community here, but the couple's mortgage company said the house was overpriced, and so they wouldn't lend.
It's really hard to get an appraiser to come out and say, okay, yeah, that makes sense that this house would be worth, double what everything else is in the area.
David has let them move in nonetheless, and they're renting from him while he tries to work with a different bank. But he wants buyers. In the area, nearly 60% of occupied properties are rented.
It's been difficult. I mean, you get your highs and your lows like in anything. I consider it a marathon, not a sprint.
As well as the blight and crime, there are other factors that could be affecting the housing market here.
A lot of these schools have closed. And again, to get families in here and to have that community, you need to have schools.
It's hard to attract families with children if you don't have good schools. Unfortunately, you'll get either people that are older that don't have kids or younger that are just getting started and more transient.
East of Troost, most of the schools are run by the Kansas City Public School District. Kevin Masters is its Director of Government Relations.
We want our buildings to be the glue, the fabric of that particular community.
Of the 16,000 or so students the district educates, only 9% are white. Most are black or Hispanic. It's a district that's had its share of problems.
While there are very bright kids and very hardworking teachers, we've had our issues. I mean, for many years we were unaccredited.
In 2014, the school district earned provisional accreditation, and it's fighting hard to gain full accreditation. For Kansas City's mayor, education is a priority because it can break the cycle of poverty that for him largely explains the homicide rate. His Turn the Page KC project has provided reading support to thousands of Kansas City children.
We have failed and failed miserably over the decades at providing the kids in this community with not just an accredited education, but a world-class education.
Now, you may think that the mayor and the school district are in step, in that they both want to see educational attainment improve. They do, but a spat has broken out. The district claims that City Hall's decisions are denying it millions every year, and a lack of funds meant it couldn't maintain these two schools, which it had to shut in the last few years.
But I can show you some blight that we're also trying to correct. We've got water leakage throughout the building. We've got lead paint, from my understanding. There's asbestos.
Oddly enough, it's a dispute about the tax incentives City Hall has approved for property developers. These are relevant to the school district because it receives the majority of its funding from property taxes. When an incentive freezes or redirects these taxes, the district says its income doesn't go up as the developments go up. You're denying us around $25 million a year, says the district. Not so, says the mayor. You can't lose what you didn't have, and in the long term you'll gain as the incentives expire and your tax base rises.
There is no bank where you walk into and there's a box that says school district money, and you take it out and you hand it to some developer. It doesn't exist. But when the incentives roll off, then the tax base rises.
And there's more controversy about some of these tax incentives, or subsidies, as some people call them.
Almost entirely, these subsidies take place in the wealthier parts of town. That the east side, the low-income parts of the city that legitimately need and have claim to these subsidies don't get them at all.
Most of these tax incentives are supposed to help cities develop blighted areas. Let's have a look at where the city-owned residential blight is. Then let's add in Ivanhoe and Oak Park. And then let's compare the value of tax incentives for 3 zip codes, east and then west of Troost. It's the tax incentives downtown that have caught the eye of a think tank that promotes the free market.
It artificially lowers the price of building downtown. The places that, without this subsidy, would be attracted to developers are again, ignored. I can't speak to what it says about leadership, but certainly they're not meeting their basic responsibilities of caring for the city and delivering basic services.
I spend a lot of time talking to developers, and I spend a lot of time talking to developers about trying to get them to build east of Troost. If they don't want to do it, you can incentivize them all day long. What they look at is, how do I get a return on investment?
According to the mayor, there's resistance to be found in parts of the black community to working with some developers.
Sometimes difficult to work east of Troost. There's this patina of hostility and demand that the only people who are able to do things are African Americans. That limits your pool of people right there.
And he suspects that for some developers, prejudice and ignorance about the black community and poverty plays a part as well. His response has been for City Hall to invest some of its own money to kickstart developments east of Troost. For example, it's put nearly $1 million into a shopping centre project that's scheduled to open not far from the Carters in 2017.
This city was divided a long time ago along racial lines. And the idea that you can cure those decades of irresponsibility in 2, 3, 4 years is not logical, and it is not practical.
Meanwhile, there are stark differences either side of the Troost divide.
They don't have this over there. This is what they think about us.
Coffee. There's no place around here to get like a cup of coffee. I can go to a liquor store in 4 different places. There's really no place that I could go to get a cup of coffee. Why is that? That's not funny.
Yes, it is. I'm saying, give us the same opportunity that everybody else got.
We want the same parks. We want the same damn schools. We say we want the same chance. We want the same opportunities for a job.
Garrick and his team of officers have been targeting this one block that sits in a violent crime hotspot. Despite the time they've spent here, they've been told the criminals are still using the City Hall property once they've gone.
A lot of signs of drug use and prostitution here.
Something further needs to be done. So on a wet Saturday in July, KC Nova and the local community get stuck into the blight.
We interact with the community, but oftentimes it's not in a positive fashion. This is totally positive today, and this is what we need to do more of, putting action behind our words.
So this is one of those days where your heart just kind of swells.
Show you something.
Generally, I try and find justice within courtrooms for this community, but this is another way we find justice for them and restoration.
This is what revitalization looks like. This is absolutely a God-given day.
Oh, we got to the solid part.
But despite the effort to clean up the area and make it safer, City Hall has still not boarded up its property, even though the burn grant officers told them about it 15 weeks or so earlier.
I don't know about the specific case. But normally when we know there's a board-up situation, it's almost an emergency situation. It's usually done within 24 to 48 hours.
But City Hall did provide 4 dumpsters for the trash, and its head of housing is here. Is he embarrassed by the blight?
I wouldn't say embarrassed. I think it's the wrong word to use, embarrassment. I think it hardens me and makes me more resolute to try to find solutions for it. We get the properties when people don't pay the taxes after 4 or 5 years, but if there's a way of getting this done beforehand, that to me is really one of the key strategies I think we need to be deploying.
He would like to do more, but he hasn't been given the resources.
We could certainly use a few more dollars, yes. I mean, we could use a few more dollars.
His department's budget has been cut by nearly 15% in the last 3 years. The City Hall property will remain open until it's demolished in 2 weeks or so. That can't happen soon enough for the people who live nearby.
All times of night, people are in and out and running their cars and stuff. You can't get any rest. It's like a drama being played out in the street.
For Garrick, the day has been a success. He accepts that their efforts are just a pinprick, but he believes in small beginnings.
It definitely is a pinprick, but we take it one block at a time, and that's all we can do. And hopefully the projects get larger and larger.
In 2014, in the first full year of KC Nova, the homicide rate was the lowest it's been in decades. But for 2015, it'll let back up by around 30%.
Until September, we were on track to have yet another record-breaking year, and then September landed us 22 homicides in 1 month. We saw spikes in domestic violence homicide. We had a spike in child deaths this year. We're not going to be out of this jam in 3 to 5 years. We have to invest in our community, invest in our people, and do the right thing, and that's save lives.
Mayor Sly James claims he's doing all he can.
It isn't time for action. For City Hall
What action?
To act.
What action? Everybody says action. Nobody has an answer. If anybody had an answer to that question, you don't think it would already be being used? People seem to think that this is somehow a political issue. This is a citywide, societal problem, and the city and society has to address it, not just people in public office. That's crazy. If that were the case, it would have been done by now. Certainly, I would have done it by now if I had that power and authority and ability, but I don't even have the authority to keep guns out of the hands of 19-year-olds.
In November 2015, the mayor formed a new anti-violence task force and asked it to find pragmatic solutions to bring down the rate of violent crime. It's due to report to him in November 2016.
Right now, we're doing everything that we can. We're a founding member of KC Nova with the other 8 members. We work on that every single day.
East of Troost, and the Carters continue to try and lead a normal family life despite the threat of violence.
It's the 4th of July, Independence Day. No, we're just gonna try to have a good time. I'm gonna try to relax a little bit. I mean, once we start, if we start hearing any gunfire, then I'll want them at least on the porch or something.
When I get home, I'll have my glass of wine and I'll be looking at TV, but I will have the 16 gauge beside me.
To reduce the homicide rate will take a collective effort. It's about what goes on in the home, on the block, in the school. It's about creating hope. It's about creating a strong community again.
We absolutely don't try to instill any fear in them to where they're afraid to be out here, because that would just really defeat the purpose of living.
You heard that? Oh, yeah, it just sounded like a large caliber gun of some sort, just probably 10 or 15 rounds.
All of our children, including 3-year-olds like Amorian, should be able to sleep safely in their beds. Our divided city needs to be healed.
That's that. You know, we've got a lot of work to do, but it won't get done if we don't do it together. That's it.